Hi gang, Rob here. It's the evening of 27 October 2015. Got a From the Sharpening Bench video for you guys tonight. Kind of an interesting one. I don't know how many of you recognize this knife. Here, let me flip it around for you, see if you can figure it out. MKT. We know those to be the initials of one Medford Knife and Tool. And guys, if you've been following me on other forums besides YouTube over the last few years, you know that sometimes I want to make a snide or sarcastic remark about Medford knives. I kind of generally view them to be the pinnacle of everything that's wrong with the modern folder market circa 2015. I view them to be cartoonish, not very well engineered wastes of material that don't cut very well, don't operate very slickly, and frankly don't look very good. This one is new for the Medford lineup, the 187 series. This one is a part of. This is the 187RMP. So 187 is very creatively named for the thickness of the blade stock, 3/16 of an inch, 0.187 inches, 187 thousandths. The 187 knife. RMP stands for Ramp Nose Blade. Well, okay. So the 187 series, what is it? Well, it's a couple things. It's a budget line from Medford. The 187 series of knives sell for $425 brand new from the retailer of your choice. And they're a smallish knife, and they're very efficient in blade to handle ratio. This knife has a 3 3/8 blade and a 4 3/16 handle. Yeah, less than an inch difference between handle length and blade length. They're advertised to have a weight of about 4.8 ounces. I weigh this one solidly at 5.1. So an over 5 ounce, under 3.5 inch blade. Thickness of the handle, a whopping 610 thousandths. So they're small knives and they're budget knives from Medford. There are no customizable options. They are what they are. This RMP comes in the Coyote Brown G10 offside frame or scale. Of course, the lock side is 6AL 4V titanium. The blade material on these is D2, and the coating on the blade, it is a coated blade. It's a gray PVD finish. Kind of attractive, but it seems to show everything. Fingerprints, little grease spots. Interesting. So deployment is via a thumb hole, and it's an oval thumb hole that's kind of obscured by the frame. You'll not be flicking it open, guys, unless you can get a lot better at it than I am. There's almost no detent, and the hole is, the path of your thumb in a flick is really obscured by this sub-hilt point. But it's a good sweeper. You know, as with most things Medford, the pivot is very tight, not very free. It's on washers, and they load them up with some kind of super marine grease. You can rinse these knives out and the grease won't move. They're what they are. They're Medfords. They're quite interesting. They also make this in a drop point, which is a similar profile to this, but with less of this humpy spine. The blade seems more elongated, more conventional drop point. They're all hollow ground from 60% of their height down. It also comes in a tanto. handles seem to vary quite a bit. As I was looking at the catalog of these, after trying to find a position for this knife in my hand that wasn't terribly uncomfortable, I noticed that all the other handles are different. It looks to me like if you're interested in one of these and you want sort of a conventional EDC blade, check out the drop point, because I don't think it has some of the ergonomic issues that this one does. And so it's got sort of a 60-40 finger choil, which is kind of odd. Well, we'll get to that later. So your first two fingers are pretty well confined, and both of the grooves are really wider than they need to be. My hand's kind of stretched out on this handle, which means all the very sharp edges and points are prevalent in my grip. So in a saber grip, it looks like the hand fits in there okay, but this is not a comfortable grip. The jimping is good, not punishing, but grabs your thumb pretty well. I would say not quite Spyderco jimping, but not bad. In the overhand pinch grip, again, frankly, horribly uncomfortable for me. In a hammer grip, I'm getting a lot of clip, and I'm feeling every corner. In a draw cut grip, I'm getting jabbed right in the web of my hand. There's really nowhere to go. I guess way back, there's nowhere to go. Just bad. And I guess the most comfortable grip would be this sort of reverse tactical grip. Although at this point, your thumb is kind of in no man's land. The sub hilt actually seems to kind of work in that grip though. Okay, so that's that. Now let's talk about some design and engineering issues I have with this knife. I will say this, if you sort of buy into the Medford philosophy, he does very thin hollow grinds, so his knives do cut. But they have a pretty abrupt transition. Let's see if I can show this. And a pretty abrupt shoulder coming up to a large flat. And that's sort of a trademark blade design of his. I get it. You have a good cutting edge, a good thin cutting edge, and you have a pry bar all in the same implement. But, you know, in prices from the lowest at $425 to the highest of, I don't know, $1,000, $1,500. A collapsible 3 or 4 inch pry bar added to my knife for $1,000 doesn't seem like a really good deal to me. Just doesn't. I could carry a really good pry bar and a really good knife for half that money. They would cut better and pry better and not be prone to snapping here in this area. Couple things, guys. Notice this finger choil. It's 1.5 fingers wide. And it still terminates in a horribly executed plunge grind. The choil is way bigger than it needs to be to accommodate a finger, but not big enough to accommodate the plunge grind on this knife. Look at that beautiful, nasty heel. And this is at post sharpening, but it looked about this bad new. Now it's just sharp all the way to the back, where it wasn't before. Not much to do to fix that without making the choil big enough for 2 fingers. I don't know why we couldn't have started that grind back another 1/8 of an inch or so, except we've got a detent hole that might encroach. I don't know. Just not a well thought out design at all. I guess it does cut though. As we prepare for the moment of truth here, I want to show you something that does sort of inhibit the slicing capability. You think Tai-Chung Spydercos have coarse satin grinds? That thing is ridiculous. Not sure what the purpose of that was. Doesn't particularly look attractive. doesn't enhance the performance of the knife. We do have a cutter. Kind of too bad, really. The knife is nice and thin behind the edge. I probably could have gone with a little more effective cutting geometry than this, except this heel would have looked even worse. I sharpened this at 18 degrees per side with a little skinny 21 degree micro, and it cuts pretty well just because the blade's so thin. But man, if I could have laid that thing back to 15 with an 18 or 19 degree micro, it'd be a laser. But I can't, or my edge grind would have looked worse than it does. Before we talk about the lockup, I want to talk about the clip. At a budget price point for a Medford, $425, it's a nice clip. It is a sculpted titanium clip, good retention, one-handable into the pocket. Might be the highlight of the knife. The construction is by the pivot, of course, and the structure of the knife is enhanced by the double lug lockup. So you've got, sort of a tripod, a lug in this scale, a lug in this frame, and a pivot, keeping the knife fairly rigidly located, but it gets a little weak back here. We have non-shouldered standoffs and screws that go all the way through and actually thread into the titanium frame. For $425, that's Bush League, actually. We should have sleeves, posts going through the titanium, not threaded into the titanium. If you strip a thread, you bought a new frame, I guess. Lock bar tension is really good, but who knows how good it would be if it actually engaged at a sane point. We got 187 thousandths, 3/16 of an inch of blade stock at a pretty well angled ramp on the blade tang, and we engage at about 10%. Now this is not my knife, it belongs to my sharpening customer Chris, and I'm not going to do this, but it is a non-steel inserted titanium lock bar with, maybe more than 10%. There might be 25 or 30 thousandths of an inch of engagement, so let's call it 15%. I will guarantee you, if I took this knife on this leather pad and gave it a good wrap on the spine, I will guarantee you the corner of that lock bar will shear off and the blade will close. There's no reason for that. Look how thick the lock bar is and look how thick the blade tang is. You could lock that thing up at 40 or 50%, still not have, a super long distance to push the lock bar to disengage it. And a lock that's, 100 times stronger than this. This is, guys, what we call insanely early lockup. Yeah! Okay, well, good luck with that. Crazy. Yeah. Insane equals crazy in this case. Access to the lock bar is pretty good. You have your choice, second groove or first groove, and you can easily clear the detent, what there is of it, without having to regrip. That's not a bad thing. Man, just cannot get comfortable. When I first started seeing Medford knives, on YouTube and on Instagram a few years ago, I had to do a little research because they just looked so ridiculous to me, like the Praetorian and some of his other stuff. Oh, by the way, this does come in a flipper. I'd love to see how that works. That's with the detent ball off the blade. I'd love to see how it flips, but the flipper tab is like a foot long, so maybe you get enough leverage to flip it. I don't know, but anyway, I started looking at Medford knives, and they hit me. My first reaction was, they are so ridiculous. There must be an explanation. So I started, reading stuff on Medford's website, and he has a YouTube channel, Greg Medford does, and I started watching his videos, and apparently I'm not the only one who has that reaction, because a lot of his videos are trying to explain to all of us knife people who are way stupider than he is why his knives make sense and we're stupid. For instance, why they're so hard to take apart, why he Loctites them with, I don't know, red Loctite or whatever he uses, because there's no reason you should ever have to take his knives apart. He puts mil-spec marine grease in there. You can run hot water over the knife all day long and it still stays greased. There's no reason to ever take it apart. He tried to explain why his knives are hard to open, specifically his Praetorian series. And there's some cool move you make in the fuller where you start out here and slide your thumb along, but he really prefers, because it's tactically superior, to use two hands to open your knife. That is way faster, guys. You reach into your right pocket, pull your knife out, bring it to the front of your body, and then engage your left hand. That is so much faster than doing something silly like pulling the knife out of your pocket and opening it like that. I don't know why we don't get that. I guess it's because none of us is as smart as Greg Medford. And he explains why his grinds make sense, and he does a lot of explaining on his YouTube channel. And we're supposed to be enlightened and learn and understand why this knife, among others, makes sense. A lot of knives I can buy for $425 with steels better than D2, even though I like D2, and that work a whole lot better than this and fit your hand better and all kinds of stuff. But if you got to have a Medford, and you can't afford $600 or $800 or $1,000, this will get you there, and it will cut. At least it will cut. So I got to give them that. I will say this. It has no lock rock. It has no side-to-side play. It does open. It does close. And it does cut. And it's got a screaming edge on it, by golly. And I will say this too. I'm going to leave you with a positive. The factory edge was a polished edge, and it was pretty sharp. It didn't have very good symmetry, and it wasn't sharp back here at the heel. But it was sharp, and it looked good. It just looks better now, and it's sharper now. And we got us a knife, boys. Okay, so how are we going to conclude this? How are we going to summarize this initial review of the Medford 187RMP? Well, I guess first, to summarize my view of Medford Knife and Tool altogether, it's important to realize that as long as people have been selling knives, they have been selling knives with hyperbole and hype. Nothing new there. I mean, nothing new there. You can talk about the Frost Cutlery dude on Late Night Home Shopping. You can talk about Jim Parker back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. You can go back as long as you want to, and you can find snake oil salesmen with several knives tucked into the lining of their coat or their carpet bag or whatever. So let's not bang on Greg Medford too hard. When he parades military operators in front of the camera, and they, snicker to each other about how all other knives are just toys for kids, and if you really want a tool that'll save your life, you have to buy a Medford. We have to realize that guest in front of the camera is paid, and he's working for Greg Medford, who is a knife marketer extraordinaire. Okay, so that said, he just makes silly knives. This is one of them, but at least he'll cut. So let's just end with that, my friends. Grace to you. More grace than I have shown for Medford Knife and Tool and the 187RMP. Sometimes I have a bad day. And peace from God our Father and the Lord Jesus Christ. And remember, the Word and Chris's Medford are sharp.